The gunshot cracked through the Montana air, just as Olivia Kennedy dropped her basket of laundry, watching the two men tumble out of the saloon door and into the dusty street of Butte, their argument over cards threatening to turn the bright afternoon into something far darker. She pressed herself against the general store wall, heart hammering, waiting for the violence to pass as it so often did in this rough mining town, where copper brought fortune seekers and desperados alike. The marshal appeared moments later, his weathered face stern as he separated the brawlers with practiced efficiency. And Olivia released the breath she had been holding before gathering her scattered linens from the boardwalk. It was September of 1878, and Butte, Montana had grown faster than anyone could have predicted. The silver and copper mines drew men from across the country, transforming what had been a small settlement into a bustling town that never quite seemed civilized enough, despite the new buildings going up every week. Olivia had arrived 3 months earlier with her Aunt Martha, both of them fleeing the difficult circumstances back in St. Louis, where debt collectors had finally taken everything after her uncle's death. At 22, Olivia had thought herself destined for spinsterhood, but her aunt insisted that the West offered opportunities for reinvention that the established East could never provide. She continued down the street toward Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where she rented a small room on the 3rd floor and helped with cooking and cleaning to offset the cost. Her aunt had found work as a seamstress and lived 2 streets over in a slightly better establishment, but they saw each other most Sundays after church services. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, unusual for September, but not unheard of in Montana's unpredictable climate. Olivia's dark blonde hair stuck to the back of her neck beneath her bonnet, and she longed for the cool interior of the boarding house. As she rounded the corner onto Silver Street, she nearly collided with old Mr. Patterson, who stood leaning heavily against his walking stick, staring up at his small cabin with an expression of such defeat that it stopped Olivia in her tracks. "Mr. Patterson, are you quite all right?" she asked, setting down her basket. The elderly man, who had to be pushing 70, turned to her with watery blue eyes. "Miss Kennedy, I apologize. I did not mean to block your path. I am simply trying to gather the energy to fetch firewood before nightfall. These autumn evenings grow cold and my woodpile is depleted." Olivia looked past him to the cabin, noting the absence of smoke from the chimney despite the morning chill still lingering. "Where is your woodpile located?" "Behind McGrady's lumber yard, about half a mile south. My son usually helps, but he is working a double shift at the mine." Mr. Patterson's shoulders sagged. "I thought myself capable, but this morning I tried and barely made it halfway before my legs gave out. Getting old is not for the faint of heart, Miss Kennedy." Without hesitation, Olivia picked up her basket. "Let me take these to my room and I will fetch your firewood. It is no trouble at all." "Oh, I could not ask such a thing of a young lady," Mr. Patterson protested, though hope flickered in his expression. "That is hard labor, carrying logs such a distance." "You are not asking, I am offering," Olivia said firmly. "I may not look it in these skirts, but I am stronger than you might think. My uncle had me helping in his warehouse for years before we came west. Please, go inside and rest. I will have wood stacked by your door within the hour." She did not wait for further argument, hurrying to the boarding house where she quickly changed into her sturdiest dress, the brown calico that had seen her through the journey from Missouri. Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look as she explained her errand, but said nothing. Merely nodding and returning to the soup, she was preparing for the evening meal. The walk to McGrady's lumber yard took her through the rougher section of town, where the saloons outnumbered respectable establishments 3 to 1. Olivia kept her eyes forward and her pace brisk, having learned quickly that showing fear invited trouble, while projecting confidence often prevented it. A few miners called out greetings from a porch where they sat drinking, but nothing worse than that, and she reached the lumber yard without incident. McGrady himself was nowhere to be seen, but his son Jeremy pointed her toward the area where cut firewood was stacked for sale to townspeople. "How much you needing, miss?" he asked, tobacco staining the corner of his mouth. "Enough for Mr. Patterson to get through several days," Olivia replied, pulling coins from her pocket. Her carefully saved wages felt lighter with each expenditure, but she could not bear the thought of the old man sitting in the cold. Jeremy's eyebrows rose. "You buying wood for old Patterson? That is mighty kind of you. Tell you what, I will give you the friends and family rate. Man's a good sort, helped my father when we first came to town." Olivia smiled gratefully and paid the reduced price, then began the work of loading logs into an old canvas sack Jeremy provided. The wood was heavy, seasoned pine and fir that would burn well and long. She managed to get a reasonable load into the sack, though it weighed more than she had anticipated. Hoisting it onto her back with some difficulty, she began the return journey to Mr. Patterson's cabin. The weight bore down on her shoulders immediately, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the moderate temperature. She had made it perhaps 200 yards when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her, slowing from a canter to a walk. A shadow fell across her path, and a deep voice spoke. "Madam, that looks considerably heavy. Might I offer assistance?" Olivia turned, squinting up at the man on horseback. He sat astride a handsome chestnut mare, and wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy. Worn denim pants, a chambray shirt faded from many washings, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the sun. What she could see of his features showed a man perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' stubble, dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of creek water, that peculiar greenish-brown that changed with the light. Those eyes held genuine concern, not the leering interest she had learned to recognize and avoid. "I thank you for the offer, but I am managing well enough," Olivia said, though her shoulders already ached. "It is not far now." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the dirt with barely a sound. "Begging your pardon, madam, but managing and doing well are two different things. My mother raised me to help folks in need, and you look like you could use a hand. Where are you headed with that load?" "Mr. Patterson's cabin on Silver Street," Olivia admitted, adjusting the sack on her shoulders. "He needs firewood, and I am bringing it to him." Something shifted in the cowboy's expression, a softness that transformed his weather-beaten features. "You are buying and carrying firewood for old Patterson. That is about the kindest thing I have heard of in this town in some time." He reached for the sack before she could protest. "Please, let me carry this for you. It would be my genuine pleasure." There was such sincerity in his voice that Olivia found herself relinquishing the burden, relief flooding through her shoulders as the weight lifted. "You are very kind, Mr. Forrester. Jacob Forrester, but everyone calls me Jake." He settled the sack over his own shoulder with ease as though it weighed nothing at all. "And you are Miss Kennedy, if I overheard correctly back at the lumber yard." "Olivia Kennedy," she confirmed, falling into step beside him as he led his horse with his free hand. "You were at McGrady's." "I was making arrangements for fence posts to be delivered to the ranch where I work. Saw you loading up that wood and meant to offer help then, but you were gone before I finished my business. Lucky I spotted you on the road." Jake's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, she noticed. "How long have you been in Butte, Miss Kennedy?" "3 months now. My aunt and I came from Missouri." Olivia found herself surprisingly comfortable talking with this stranger. "And you mentioned a ranch, the Foster place, about 8 miles north. I have been working there near 5 years now, since I was 21 and fresh off a cattle drive from Texas. Good people, the Fosters. They treat their hands fair, and the work is steady." Jake adjusted the sack slightly. "I come into town every couple weeks for supplies, sometimes more often if Mrs. Foster needs something particular for the house." They walked together through the streets, an odd pair that drew curious glances from passers-by. Olivia was acutely aware of the impropriety of walking with an unknown man, but something about Jake Forrester felt safe, trustworthy in a way she could not quite articulate. He spoke easily about life on the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the beautiful country surrounding Butte with its mountains and valleys. His voice held affection for the land that reminded her of how poets spoke of their muses. "You truly love it here," she observed as they turned onto Silver Street. "I do," Jake agreed. "I know Butte itself can be rough, what with the mines and the gambling and the fighting. But the country itself, Miss Kennedy, it is like nothing else on God's earth. The way the mountains look at sunrise, the smell of pine forests after rain, the absolute clarity of the sky at night when you are out watching the herd. It gets into your blood, this place. Makes everywhere else seem tame by comparison." They reached Mr. Patterson's cabin to find the old man dozing in a chair on his small porch. He startled awake at their approach, confusion clearing to recognition and then surprise. "Miss Kennedy and young Forrester, what is this?" "Your firewood, Mr. Patterson," Olivia said warmly. "Where would you like it stacked?" "Jake, you are a good man for helping her," Mr. Patterson said, pushing himself to his feet. "Right there against the house is perfect, but Miss Kennedy, you should not have spent your money on this. I would have managed." "Perhaps so, but now you do not have to," Olivia replied. She watched as Jake efficiently stacked the logs against the cabin wall, his movements economical and practiced. "We all need help sometimes. There is no shame in accepting kindness." Mr. Patterson's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "You are a rare soul, young lady. The world needs more people like you." Jake finished stacking and brushed bark dust from his hands. "She carried this whole load from McGrady's before I caught up to her and convinced her to let me help. Near about broke my heart seeing her bent under that weight." "I was perfectly capable," Olivia protested, feeling her cheeks warm at his words. "Never said you were not capable," Jake countered, his creek water eyes holding hers. "Just said you should not have to do it alone when there are folks willing to help." Mr. Patterson looked between them with undisguised interest. "Will you both come in for coffee? It is the least I can do." Olivia knew she should refuse, should return to the boarding house before Mrs. Chen needed help with supper preparations. But something made her accept, and Jake agreed readily, tying his horse to the porch rail before following them inside. The cabin was small but meticulously clean, everything in its place despite the obvious poverty of the furnishings. Mr. Patterson put coffee on to boil while Olivia and Jake sat at the rough-hewn table, a slightly awkward silence falling now that they were in closer quarters. The older man filled it with stories of his younger days as they waited for the coffee to be ready. Tales of coming west in the gold rush of the 50s, of meeting his wife in a mining camp, of raising children in this wild territory. "She passed 6 years ago," he said quietly, pouring coffee into chipped cups. "Still miss her every day, but she would have liked you both. She always said the measure of a person was in their kindness to those who could do nothing for them in return." Olivia sipped the strong, bitter coffee and felt something shift in the air of the little cabin. Jake had grown quiet, staring into his cup with an expression she could not read. When he finally looked up, his gaze found hers and held it. "That is true wisdom," he said softly. "I think I would have liked your wife very much, Mr. Patterson." They stayed perhaps half an hour, finishing their coffee and listening to more of the old man's stories. When they finally took their leave, the afternoon had stretched into early evening, and Olivia knew she was late getting back to help with supper. Jake walked with her back toward the boarding house, leading his patient horse beside them. "I am glad I saw you on the road today," he said as they neared Mrs. Chen's establishment. "It is rare to meet someone with a truly kind heart." "You helped just as much as I did," Olivia pointed out. "Does that not make you equally kind?" Jake shook his head. "I carried wood." "You saw a need and spent your own money to meet it, with no thought of recognition or reward. That is different, Miss Kennedy. That is special." He tipped his hat to her, and Olivia found herself wishing he would stay longer, would continue talking in that warm, sincere voice that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before. But propriety and her responsibilities called, so she thanked him for his help and hurried inside, where Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look, but asked no questions as Olivia threw herself into helping prepare the evening meal. That night, lying in her narrow bed under the eaves, Olivia found herself thinking about creek water eyes and calloused hands gentle with firewood, about a voice that spoke of mountains with reverence and kindness with understanding. She told herself she was being foolish, that one encounter meant nothing, that she would likely never see Jake Forrester again. Butte was not so large that their paths could not cross, but neither was it so small that such a meeting was guaranteed. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of pine forests and starlit skies. The following Sunday, Olivia sat with her Aunt Martha in the small wooden church on the east side of town, listening to Reverend Thomas deliver a sermon on charity that felt oddly timed given her recent actions. Her aunt, a thin woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, had been giving her speculative looks throughout the service. "You seem distracted," Martha whispered as they stood for the final hymn. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," Olivia whispered back, though she knew her aunt would not let the matter rest. Sure enough, as they filed out of the church into the bright September morning, Martha linked her arm through Olivia's and steered her toward the small park area where congregants often gathered to socialize after services. "Now, tell me what has been occupying your thoughts." "You have barely heard a word," the Reverend said. Olivia considered deflecting but knew from long experience that her aunt was like a dog with a bone once her curiosity was aroused. "I helped Mr. Patterson with firewood last week. It was nothing, truly." "I heard about that," Martha said, surprising her. "Mrs. Chen mentioned it to me when we crossed paths at the general store. She said a cowboy helped you carry it." "He saw me on the road and offered assistance," Olivia said, striving for a casual tone. "It would have been rude to refuse." Her aunt's lips curved into a small smile. "Mrs. Chen said he was quite handsome." "I did not notice," Olivia lied, feeling heat creep up her neck. "Olivia Grace Kennedy, you are many things, but a good liar is not among them." Martha patted her arm. "There is nothing wrong with noticing a handsome young man, especially one kind enough to help you with a charitable errand. Did he give you his name?" "Jake Forrester. He works at the Foster Ranch north of town." Olivia saw no point in withholding information her aunt would ferret out eventually anyway. "Foster Ranch," Martha mused. "I know Mrs. Foster slightly. She comes into the dress shop occasionally. Good family from what I understand. Well respected." Before Olivia could respond, she caught sight of a familiar figure across the park area, and her heart gave an unexpected leap. Jake Forrester stood talking with Reverend Thomas, his hat in his hands, hair neatly combed and wearing what were clearly his Sunday clothes, clean dark pants and a white shirt with a string tie. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up, and his face broke into a wide smile of recognition. He excused himself from the reverend and began making his way through the crowd toward her, and Olivia's mouth went suddenly dry. "Well," Martha murmured, "this is interesting." Jake reached them and nodded respectfully to both women. "Miss Kennedy, what a pleasant surprise. I had hoped I might see you in town but did not dare presume. Mr. Forrester, may I introduce my aunt, Mrs. Martha Kennedy?" Olivia was proud that her voice came out steady. "Aunt Martha, this is Jake Forrester, the gentleman who helped me with Mr. Patterson's Firewood." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Kennedy." Jake's manners were impeccable, Olivia noted. "Your niece did a very kind thing for Mr. Patterson. I was honored to assist her." Martha studied him with those sharp eyes, and Olivia knew her aunt was cataloging everything: his respectful demeanor, his clean appearance, the sincerity in his expression. "It was kind of you to help her, Mr. Forrester. That is quite a distance to carry firewood." "I could not in good conscience ride past and leave her struggling with such a burden," Jake said simply. He turned back to Olivia. "I was wondering, Miss Kennedy, if you might permit me to call on you sometime. With your aunt's permission, of course," he added quickly, glancing at Martha. Olivia's heart hammered. "I would like that very much. As would I." Jake's smile transformed his entire face, and Olivia thought he might rival the Montana sun for pure warmth. "Would Tuesday afternoon be convenient? I could meet you at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, and perhaps we could take a walk through town, properly chaperoned, of course." "Tuesday afternoon would be perfectly suitable," Martha interjected before Olivia could speak. "I will accompany them as chaperone. Shall we say 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock, Jake agreed, looking as though someone had handed him a precious gift. "I will count the hours. Ladies, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday." He bowed slightly and withdrew, and Olivia watched him go with something fluttering in her chest that might have been happiness or might have been terror, possibly both. "Well," Martha said, satisfaction clear in her voice, "he seems like a good young man. Respectful, employed, and clearly taken with you. You could do far worse, Olivia." "Aunt Martha, it is just one walk," Olivia protested, but she could not suppress her smile. "One walk is how these things begin," her aunt said wisely. "Mark my words, that young man is quite serious in his interest. I saw how he looked at you." Olivia thought about creek water eyes and gentle hands, about a voice that spoke of kindness as something special. Perhaps her aunt was right. Perhaps something significant had begun on that dusty road with a sack of firewood and a stranger's offer of help. Tuesday could not come fast enough. The intervening days passed with agonizing slowness. Olivia threw herself into her work at the boarding house, helping Mrs. Chen with cleaning, cooking, and the endless laundry that came with housing 12 lodgers. She darned socks, scrubbed floors, and kneaded bread dough with more energy than strictly necessary, trying to keep her mind from constantly circling back to Tuesday afternoon. On Monday evening, she visited her aunt's small room above the dress shop to discuss what she should wear. Martha had laid out 3 options on the narrow bed: a blue cotton dress with white trim, a green calico with tiny flowers, and the newer gray dress with black piping that Olivia had purchased shortly after arriving in Butte. "The blue brings out your eyes," Martha said thoughtfully. "But the gray is more fashionable and shows your figure to advantage. What sort of impression do you wish to make?" Olivia studied the dresses. "I want to look nice, but not as though I am trying too hard. He has only seen me in my everyday clothes, so I do not want to appear completely different." "The blue, then," Martha decided. It is pretty without being ostentatious, and the color suits you wonderfully. Wear it with your good bonnet and you will be perfect." Tuesday dawned clear and bright, and Olivia was grateful that Montana's unpredictable weather had decided to cooperate. She completed her morning chores with unusual efficiency, then bathed and dressed with painstaking care. The blue dress fit well, and she had to admit the color did complement her hazel eyes. She twisted her dark blonde hair into a neat arrangement at the base of her neck, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face, and secured her best bonnet over it. Mrs. Chen smiled approvingly when Olivia came down to the parlor at 10 minutes before 2. "You look very nice, Miss Olivia." "That young man, he is lucky." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Olivia's hands were trembling slightly, and she folded them in her lap to still them. "I hope I am not making too much of a simple walk." "A walk is never simple when it is with someone who makes your heart beat faster," the older woman said with unexpected wisdom. "Be yourself. That is all you need to be." Martha arrived at precisely 5 minutes before 2, and Jake appeared on the boarding house steps at 2 o'clock exactly, his promptness suggesting he placed importance on the occasion. He wore clean dark pants and a crisp shirt, his hat in his hands, and his face lit up when Olivia opened the door. "Miss Kennedy, you look lovely," he said, then flushed slightly as though surprised by his own boldness. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester. You are very kind." Olivia felt warmth creep into her own cheeks. "Shall we?" Martha said briskly, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "I thought we might walk up toward the park and perhaps stop at the bakery if it is open." They set out into the pleasant afternoon, Jake walking beside Olivia, with Martha trailing just far enough behind to provide propriety without impeding conversation. The town was busy with the usual Tuesday commerce. Wagons rattling past, miners heading toward their shifts, housewives carrying baskets from the general store. "How has your week been?" Jake asked as they navigated around a muddy patch in the road. "I hope Mr. Patterson is keeping warm with that firewood." "I stopped by to check on him yesterday," Olivia replied. "He is doing well and asked me to thank you again for your help. His son has promised to keep the woodpile stocked going forward, so hopefully he will not have to worry about it." "That is good to hear." Jake's shoulder briefly brushed hers as they stepped aside to allow a wagon to pass, and Olivia felt the contact like a spark. "I have been thinking about what you did, carrying firewood for an old man who has no claim on your time or resources. Most people would have expressed sympathy and walked on by. What made you stop to help?" Olivia considered the question as they continued walking. "I suppose because I could. When my uncle died, we had nothing, and people were not particularly kind about it. Creditors took everything we had, including our dignity if they could have managed it. A few people helped us, gave my aunt work or helped me find a position, and those small kindnesses made the difference between surviving and going under. I learned that when you have the ability to help someone, you should, because you never know when you might be the one in need." Jake was quiet for a moment, and when she glanced at him, his expression was serious, almost reverent. "That is a hard lesson to learn. I am sorry you had to experience it, but I admire the person it helped you become." "You speak as though kindness is rare," Olivia observed. "In my experience, it is," Jake said. "Oh, people are friendly enough, especially in a place like Butte where cooperation can mean survival. But true kindness, the kind that costs you something with no expectation of return, that is precious and uncommon." They had reached the small park area where church socials were sometimes held, and by unspoken agreement, they slowed their pace. A few other couples walked nearby, similarly chaperoned, and children played near the small pond that formed the park's centerpiece. "Tell me about Texas," Olivia said, wanting to turn the conversation toward lighter topics. "You mentioned coming from there originally." Jake's face brightened. "Born and raised on a small ranch outside San Antonio. My father raised cattle and I grew up in the saddle, practically. Learned to rope and ride before I learned to read, much to my mother's dismay." His smile turned wistful. "They both passed from fever when I was 19. Lost the ranch to debt after that, could not keep it going on my own. Signed on with a cattle drive heading north and ended up here in Montana. Meant to keep moving, but something about this country spoke to me. Felt like home in a way Texas never quite did after I lost my parents." "I am sorry about your mother and father," Olivia said softly. "That must have been terribly difficult." "It was, but it was also 7 years ago. The sharp edges of grief wear smooth eventually, leave you with the good memories instead of just the loss." Jake gestured toward a bench near the pond. "Would you like to sit for a bit? If your aunt does not object." Martha, who had been examining some late-season wildflowers with apparent fascination, nodded her approval, and they settled onto the bench while she maintained a discreet distance. Ducks paddled across the pond's surface, and the afternoon sun painted everything in warm gold. "Can I ask you something?" Jake turned toward her, his expression earnest. "What are your plans for the future? Do you intend to stay in Butte, or is this temporary until something better comes along?" Olivia thought about the question carefully. "I honestly do not know. Aunt Martha and I came here because we had few other options, but it has not been entirely unwelcoming. Mrs. Chen is kind, the work is steady if not exciting, and the town has a certain rough charm to it. But I suppose I always imagined having more than just a room in a boarding house and work that pays barely enough to survive." "What would more look like?" Jake asked. "If you could have anything you wanted." No one had ever asked her that before, and Olivia found herself having to think about it. "A home of my own, I suppose. Nothing grand, just a place that belongs to me where I could put down roots. Maybe a garden where I could grow vegetables and flowers. Work that felt meaningful rather than just necessary. And," she hesitated, then continued, "someone to share it all with. A family, eventually." "That does not sound like asking for too much," Jake said quietly. "That sounds like a good life, the kind worth building." "And what do you want, Mr. Forrester?" Olivia asked, turning the question back to him. "What does your future look like?" Jake gazed out over the pond, his profile thoughtful. "I have been saving my wages for the past 5 years. Mr. Foster pays fair, and I live simply out at the ranch, so most of my money has gone into the bank here in town. My plan has always been to save enough to buy a piece of land and start my own small ranch. Nothing like the Foster spread, just enough acres to run a modest herd and support a family. Build a house with my own hands, raise children who know the value of hard work and the beauty of this country." He turned back to her. "And find a woman who would want to build that life with me, someone strong and kind and true." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that sent Olivia's heart racing. She saw in Jake's gaze the same yearning she felt, the hope that perhaps they had found in each other something worth pursuing. "That also sounds like a good life," she managed to say. "The kind worth building." Jake smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I am glad you think so." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the ducks and the play of light on water, both aware of Martha's watchful presence and the proprieties that governed such interactions. But despite the physical distance maintained, despite having known each other barely a week, Olivia felt closer to Jake Forrester than she had felt to anyone in a very long time. Eventually, they rose and continued their walk through town, stopping briefly at the bakery where Jake insisted on buying sweet rolls for all 3 of them. The rolls were still warm, and Olivia savored the taste of cinnamon and sugar as they walked back toward the boarding house. "Might I call on you again?" Jake asked as they reached Mrs. Chen's front steps. "Perhaps this Sunday after church?" "I would like that very much," Olivia replied, and was rewarded with another of those transformative smiles. "Until Sunday, then." Jake tipped his hat to both women. "Mrs. Kennedy, thank you for your chaperonage. Miss Kennedy, it has been a true pleasure." After he left, Martha linked her arm through Olivia's and steered her inside, waiting until they reached Olivia's small room before speaking. "That young man is courting you, Olivia. Seriously courting you." "How do you feel about that?" Olivia sank onto her narrow bed, trying to organize her tumbling thoughts. "I barely know him, Aunt Martha. It has only been a week." "Sometimes a week is enough to recognize something significant," Martha said gently. "I knew your uncle 3 days before I knew I would marry him. When you meet the right person, there is a knowing that goes beyond logic or time." "Do you think he is the right person?" Olivia asked, needing her aunt's wisdom. Martha sat beside her and took her hand. "I think he is a good man who sees something special in you and is not afraid to show it. I think he has a steady job and clear plans for his future. I think he treats you with respect and kindness. Whether he is the right person is something only you can determine, but he certainly seems worth getting to know better." Olivia thought about creek water eyes and gentle hands, about dreams of land and homes and families. "I think I would like to get to know him better." "Then that is what you should do," Martha said firmly. "Life is too short and opportunities too rare to ignore when something promising comes along. See where this leads, Olivia. You deserve happiness." Over the following weeks, Jake became a regular presence in Olivia's life. He called on her every Sunday after church, and they took carefully chaperoned walks through Butte and its surrounding areas. Martha accompanied them sometimes, but increasingly Jake's friend Thomas Wilder from the Foster Ranch came along to provide chaperonage, allowing Martha to attend to her own affairs. Thomas was quieter than Jake, a lean man with sandy hair and a serious demeanor, but Olivia liked him immediately. He and Jake had worked together for 3 years, and their friendship was evident in the easy way they interacted. Jake talked about nothing but you for a week straight after carrying that firewood, Thomas told Olivia during one of their walks, while Jake had stepped into the general store to purchase something. "Drove the rest of us boys near crazy with his mooning about. Never seen him so taken with anyone." "Thomas," Jake groaned when he returned and overheard the last part, "must you embarrass me?" "Someone has to keep you humble," Thomas replied, grinning. "Cannot have you getting above yourself." Olivia laughed at their banter, delighted by the glimpse into Jake's life beyond their formal courtship rituals. As September faded into October, she learned more about him with each meeting. His love of horses, his skill with leather working and carpentry, his habit of reading before bed even after exhausting days of ranch work. He borrowed books from Mr. Foster's library and brought them to share with Olivia, and they discovered a mutual love of adventure stories and poetry. In turn, Jake learned about her life before Montana, about growing up in St. Louis as an only child in a household that was always one financial disaster away from ruin. He heard about her mother's death when she was 12, about stepping into adult responsibilities far too young, about the shame and helplessness of watching creditors strip away every familiar thing after her uncle's death. "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for," Jake told her one evening as they sat on Mrs. Chen's front porch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Thomas had taken Martha to see some new fabric at the dress shop, giving them a rare few moments of relative privacy. Going through all that and still having the capacity for kindness, still being willing to help others. That takes real strength of character. I do not feel particularly strong most days, Olivia admitted. Mostly I feel like I am making everything up as I go along and hoping no one notices. Jake laughed softly. I think that is how most people feel if they are honest, but you hide it well. He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand, the first time they had touched beyond the occasional brush of shoulders while walking. His palm was calloused and warm, and Olivia felt the contact all the way to her bones. Olivia, I need to tell you something. Her heart began to pound. What is it? I am falling in love with you, Jake said simply, his creek water eyes holding hers with absolute sincerity. I know we have only known each other 2 months, and I know that probably sounds too fast, but it is the truth. Ever since I saw you carrying that firewood with such determination, ever since I learned you had bought it with your own scarce money for an old man you barely knew, you have been in my thoughts constantly. Getting to know you these past weeks has only deepened what I feel. You are kind and strong and smart and beautiful, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Olivia could barely breathe. Jake, you do not have to say anything right now, he interrupted gently. I know this is sudden. I just needed you to know where my heart stands. I am courting you with serious intentions, Olivia. I want to build the life we talked about that first day in the park, and I want to build it with you. I am falling in love with you too, Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible and cautious, but my heart does not seem to care about sense or caution where you are concerned. Jake's face transformed with joy, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both chaste and charged with emotion. Then we are both in trouble, because I have lost all sense and caution as well. They sat together in the gathering dusk, hands clasped, and Olivia felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the universe. The future, which had seemed so uncertain just months ago, suddenly held shape and promise. She could see it stretching ahead. A life built with this good man who valued kindness, who spoke of dreams with clear eyes and worked steadily toward making them real. When Martha and Thomas returned, they took one look at the couple on the porch and shared a knowing glance. Later, after Jake and Thomas had ridden back toward the Foster ranch, Martha hugged Olivia tightly. He told you he loves you, did not he? She asked, though it was not really a question. Yes, Olivia confirmed, unable to suppress her smile. And I told him the same. Good, Martha said firmly. That is very good. Now we wait for the proposal, which I predict will come before winter truly sets in. Olivia laughed, but part of her thought her aunt might be right. There was purpose in Jake's actions, a determination that suggested he was not a man to waste time once his mind was made up. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with anticipation. October brought colder weather and the first light snows to the mountains surrounding Butte. Jake continued his Sunday visits, and the courtship deepened despite the chaptering keeping physical contact minimal. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their beliefs, their hopes and fears. Jake spoke more about his plans to buy land, showing Olivia maps he had marked of properties that might come available. There was a plot about 10 miles from Butte, near enough to town for convenience but far enough for privacy, with good grazing land and a stream running through it. The owner is getting older and has been making noises about selling, Jake explained, his finger tracing the property lines on the map. I have been saving specifically for this. If everything goes according to plan, I should have enough for a down payment by next spring. That is wonderful, Jake, Olivia said, studying the map with interest. It looks like beautiful country. It is. His voice was soft. I went out there last week. There is a spot near the stream on a small rise where you can see for miles. That is where I would build the house. 4 rooms to start, but designed so we could add on as the family grows." The implication in his words was clear, and Olivia felt warmth spread through her chest. "That sounds perfect." As October moved toward November, Olivia noticed Jake seemed increasingly preoccupied, nervous in a way she had not seen before. He stumbled over his words, seemed to lose track of conversations, and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She thought she knew what was coming, and the knowledge made her own nerves flutter with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The proposal came on the first Sunday of November, a crisp day when the sky was so blue, it almost hurt to look at it. They had walked out beyond town to a spot Jake particularly loved, where the prairie began its climb toward the mountains, and the whole vast sweep of Montana spread before them. Thomas and Martha trailed behind, giving them space while maintaining propriety. Jake stopped walking and turned to face Olivia, taking both her hands in his. "I had a whole speech prepared," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Practiced it all week, but standing here looking at you, I cannot remember a single word of it." Olivia's heart thundered. "Jake, I love you, Olivia Kennedy," he said, rushing the words as though afraid he might lose his nerve. "I love your kindness and your strength and your laugh and the way you see beauty in small things. I love how you helped Mr. Patterson without a second thought, and how you always have a smile for Mrs. Chen even after a long day of work. I love talking with you and walking with you and the way the world seems brighter when you are near. I want to build the life we have talked about. I want to buy that land and build that house and raise children who learn kindness from their mother. I know I am just a ranch hand and do not have much to offer yet beyond hard work and determination, but I swear to you I will spend every day trying to give you the life you deserve." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "Olivia Kennedy, will you marry me?" Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she looked at this good man offering her not just his love but a future built on shared dreams and mutual respect. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jake Forrester, I will marry you." The joy on his face was incandescent. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and it fit perfectly, the garnet catching the sunlight. Then, with a quick glance toward their chaperones, he cupped her face gently and kissed her for the first time. A sweet, chaste press of lips that nevertheless felt like a promise and a beginning. Behind them, Martha let out a small cheer and Thomas clapped Jake on the shoulder once they broke apart. "About time," Thomas said, grinning. "Man has been carrying that ring around for 2 weeks, nearly wore a hole in his pocket checking to make sure it was still there." "Congratulations to you both," Martha said warmly, embracing first Olivia and then Jake. "I could not be happier for you." They walked back to town with a new lightness, the formal courtship replaced by something easier and more intimate now that their future was settled. Olivia kept looking at the ring on her finger, marveling at how quickly life could change. 3 months ago, she had been alone in a strange town with no prospects beyond her room at the boarding house and her work for Mrs. Chen. Now she was engaged to a man she loved, planning a future that included land and a home and the family she had long dreamed of. That evening, she sat with Martha in her aunt's room above the dress shop, drinking tea and discussing wedding plans. "How long an engagement are you thinking?" Martha asked. "It is already November, so winter will be here soon." "Jake wants to wait until spring," Olivia said. "He needs a few more months to have the full amount saved for the land down payment, and he wants that secured before we marry. He does not want to start our marriage living in the ranch bunkhouse. He plans to buy the land in March, and we could marry in April or May once the weather improves." "That seems reasonable," Martha agreed. "It gives us time to prepare properly. You will need a wedding dress, and we should start planning where the ceremony will be held. I assume Reverend Thomas will officiate." They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming, and when Olivia finally returned to the boarding house, she felt as though she were walking on air. Mrs. Chen noticed the ring immediately and clasped her hands with delight, insisting on making special dumplings to celebrate. The next months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Jake visited as often as his work allowed, and they spent hours planning their future home, sketching layouts and discussing where each room would go. He had a gift for carpentry, showing her detailed drawings of the house he envisioned. A simple 4-room structure to start, with a kitchen, a parlor, and 2 bedrooms, but built with an eye toward eventual expansion. "When we have children, we will add on here," he said, indicating the north side of the house on his drawing. 3 more bedrooms eventually, and maybe enlarge the kitchen. And here, he pointed to the back, a proper porch where we can sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Winter settled over Montana with characteristic intensity, bringing snow and cold that made travel difficult. Jake could not come to town as frequently, but he wrote letters that arrived weekly, pages filled with his neat handwriting describing life on the ranch, his dreams for their future, and his love for her. Olivia treasured each one, reading them until she had memorized every word. In January, Jake arrived at the boarding house with news that the property owner had definitely decided to sell, and had agreed to hold it for Jake until March, when the down payment would be complete. "It is really happening," he told Olivia, his excitement palpable. "By spring, we will have our land." They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in May, when the weather would hopefully be reliable and the worst of mud season past. Martha threw herself into making Olivia's wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk that she had purchased at considerable expense from a traveling salesman. "Every bride deserves a beautiful dress," Martha insisted when Olivia protested the cost. "Your uncle would have wanted you to have this. Let me do this for you." February brought more snow and a brief scare when Jake caught a bad cold that kept him at the ranch for 3 weeks. Olivia fretted until his letters resumed, assuring her he had recovered fully. Thomas came to town and reported that Jake was indeed well, but had been forbidden from making the journey in harsh weather by Mrs. Foster herself, who had threatened him with bodily harm if he risked himself unnecessarily. March finally arrived, bringing the first signs of thaw and Jake's triumphant announcement that the land was his. He had signed the papers and made the down payment, and the property with its stream and views and perfect house site belonged to him. "To us," he corrected himself when Olivia congratulated him. "It belongs to us, or it will as soon as we are married. I had the deed drawn up in both our names. Everything I have is yours, Olivia." She had never loved him more than in that moment, seeing him stand before her and offer her not just his heart but complete partnership in building their future. With the land secured, Jake began spending every spare moment clearing the house site and stockpiling materials. He had arranged with Mr. Foster to take a month off after the wedding to focus on building, and several of the other ranch hands had volunteered to help with the heavy construction. Thomas would oversee things during Jake's absence, and Mr. Foster had given his blessing along with a generous wedding gift of lumber from his own timber holdings. "You are a good man and a good worker, Jake," Mr. Foster had said, according to Jake's report. "You deserve this happiness. Build something solid, and know you always have friends at this ranch." The final weeks before the wedding flew past in a flurry of preparations. Olivia gave her notice at the boarding house, and Mrs. Chen tearfully presented her with a beautiful set of Chinese teacups as a wedding gift. "You were good worker and good person," she said, patting Olivia's hand. "You will be happy with that young man, I know these things." Aunt Martha finished the wedding dress in late April, and Olivia tried it on to find it fit perfectly, the silk draping beautifully and the simple lines flattering her figure. "You look lovely," Martha said, wiping her eyes. "Your mother would have been so proud." The wedding was set for 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, May 3rd, 1879, at the small church where Olivia and Jake had attended services throughout their courtship. Reverend Thomas had agreed to perform the ceremony, and Thomas Wilder would stand up as Jake's best man while Martha would stand with Olivia. The night before the wedding, Olivia lay awake in her narrow bed at the boarding house, thinking about how far she had come in the past year. From the desperate circumstances in St. Louis, to the uncertainty of arriving in Montana, to finding work, and building a life, to meeting Jake on that dusty road with a sack of firewood, to this moment, on the eve of her wedding to a man she loved with her whole heart. It seemed almost miraculous, the way circumstances had aligned to bring them together. She thought about Mr. Patterson and his need for firewood, about her decision to help him, about Jake happening to see her on the road at just that moment. So many small choices and chances that had led to this night, this future. If she had walked past Mr. Patterson that day, if Jake had been delayed at the lumber yard, if she had refused his help, everything would be different, but she had not walked past. She had stopped and helped, because it was the right thing to do, because someone needed assistance and she had the ability to provide it. That single act of kindness had set everything else in motion, had brought Jake into her life and led to this happiness. It was a powerful reminder that small actions could have enormous consequences, that kindness mattered more than anyone might guess. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for a May wedding. Martha helped Olivia dress in the cream silk gown, and they styled her hair in an elaborate arrangement with small white flowers tucked into the curls. When Olivia looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back, so different from the scared, uncertain girl who had arrived in but less than a year ago. "Ready?" Martha asked, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "Ready," Olivia confirmed, and they made their way to the church. The simple wooden building had been decorated with wildflowers gathered from the surrounding prairie, and it was surprisingly full of people. The regular congregation had turned out in force, along with many of the hands from the Foster Ranch and others Olivia had come to know during her time in Butte. Mr. Patterson sat in a place of honor in the front row, beaming at her as she entered, and even Mrs. Chen had closed the boarding house for the morning to attend. But Olivia had eyes only for Jake, who stood at the front of the church looking devastatingly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed and his face radiant with joy as he watched her walk down the aisle. Thomas stood beside him, grinning widely, and Reverend Thomas waited with his Bible open to the marriage ceremony. The service was simple and beautiful. They spoke traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other through all the days ahead. Jake's voice shook slightly when he said, "I do," and Olivia felt tears slipping down her cheeks as she made her own vows. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed her gently, reverently, as though she were something precious and breakable. "I love you, Mrs. Forrester," he whispered against her lips. "I love you, Mr. Forrester," she whispered back and felt him smile. The congregation erupted in applause, and they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, ready to begin building the life they had planned and dreamed of. Outside the church, people showered them with rice and good wishes. Mr. Foster had arranged for a celebration at the largest saloon in town, which had been temporarily converted into a respectable venue for the wedding breakfast. Tables groaned with food, and someone had brought a fiddle to provide music. Jake kept Olivia close to his side throughout the celebration, his hand at the small of her back or holding hers, as though he could not quite believe she was really his. They danced together, laughing when they stumbled over each other's feet, and accepted congratulations from what felt like half the town. As the afternoon wore on, they finally took their leave amid more cheers and rice throwing. Jake had arranged for them to spend their wedding night at the hotel in Butte, a luxury they would not have often in the years ahead. The following day, they would head out to their land and begin the work of building their home and life together. The hotel room was small but clean, and once the door closed behind them, Olivia felt suddenly shy. They were alone together for the first time without chaperones, married now, and the intimacy of the moment felt both exciting and terrifying. Jake seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hands gently and smiled that warm, transformative smile. "We do not have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world now." "I am not frightened," Olivia said, and realized it was true. "I trust you completely, Jake." "And I trust you," he replied, pulling her close. "I love you so much, Olivia. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," she whispered, and kissed him. The following morning they set out for their land in a borrowed wagon loaded with supplies and the few possessions they owned. The ride took about 3 hours, following rough tracks through increasingly beautiful country. When they finally crested the rise that led down to their property, Olivia caught her breath at the sight. The land was everything Jake had described. Rolling grassland dotted with stands of pine, a clear stream cutting through the middle, and mountains rising in the distance. Jake had already cleared the house site on a gentle slope overlooking the stream, and piles of lumber waited for construction to begin. "It is perfect," Olivia said, standing on the spot where their house would be. "Jake, this is absolutely perfect." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "This is where we will build our life, where we will raise our children and grow old together, where every dream we talked about will become real." They spent that first day setting up a temporary camp, stringing a canvas shelter where they would sleep until the house had a roof. True to his word, Thomas and several other ranch hands rode over the next morning, ready to help with construction. With multiple sets of hands, the work progressed quickly. The frame went up within days, and soon they were hanging walls and building the roof. Olivia worked alongside the men, doing what she could to help despite her limited construction knowledge. She prepared meals for the work crew, carried supplies, and learned how to drive nails and saw boards. Jake taught her patiently, and she loved watching him in his element, strong and capable and confident as he built their home with his own hands. 3 weeks after their wedding, the basic house was complete. 4 rooms with solid walls and a tight roof, windows that opened to let in the breeze, and a sturdy porch where they could sit and watch the sunset just as Jake had envisioned. It was simple and rough around the edges, but it was theirs, built with their own labor and their friends' generosity. The ranch hands returned to the Foster place, and Jake and Olivia spent their first night alone in their new home. They had little furniture yet, just a bed that Jake had built, a table and 2 chairs, and a wood stove for cooking. But as they lay together in the darkness, listening to the creek babbling nearby and the wind whispering through the pines, Olivia felt richer than any mansion dweller. "Happy?" Jake asked, his arm around her, her head on his chest. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Olivia replied honestly. "Thank you for this, Jake, for all of it." "Thank you for carrying firewood," he said, his voice warm with affection and humor. "If you had not been kind to Mr. Patterson that day, I might never have had the courage to speak to you." "Then I should thank Mr. Patterson for needing firewood," Olivia laughed. "And thank you for not riding past when you saw me struggling." "I could never have ridden past you," Jake said seriously. "The moment I saw you bent under that weight, determined to do something good for someone else despite the cost to yourself, something in my chest just knew. This is her, I thought. This is the woman I have been waiting for." Olivia turned in his arms to kiss him. "I felt it too. Maybe not that first moment, but soon after. When you talked about the mountains and kindness, when you bought sweet rolls for all three of us, when you looked at our future with such clear eyes. I knew you were someone special, someone worth building a life with." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other in the darkness of their new home. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Olivia felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. This man, this place, this life they were building together from dirt and determination and dreams. The following months passed in a blur of work as they established their homestead. Jake used the last of his savings to purchase 10 head of cattle, the foundation of what he hoped would eventually be a substantial herd. Olivia planted a garden near the house, cultivating vegetables and herbs and the flowers she had always wanted. They built a small barn for the horses and cattle, fencing as they could afford materials and slowly improving the property. The work was hard, dawn to dusk labor that left them exhausted most nights. But it was good work, building something that belonged to them, and they did it together. Jake taught Olivia to ride better, to rope cattle, to handle the dozens of tasks that came with ranching. She taught him things she had learned from her aunt: how to mend clothes so they would last another season, how to make butter and cheese from their milk cow's production, how to preserve food for the winter ahead. They rode into Butte once a month for supplies and to attend church, visiting with Martha and their friends. Mr. Patterson always asked after them, pleased to hear how well they were doing, and he never failed to remind anyone who would listen that he had been instrumental in bringing them together. "If I had not needed that firewood, who knows if they would have met," he would say, settling back with satisfaction. "I like to think I had a hand in their happiness." By autumn, Olivia suspected she might be pregnant, and a visit to the doctor in Butte confirmed it. The baby would arrive in the spring, the doctor said, probably late April or early May. Jake was ecstatic when she told him, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he might make her dizzy. "A baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby, Olivia." "We are," she confirmed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Are you ready to be a father?" "I have been ready since the day I met you," Jake said seriously. "I cannot wait to meet this child we made together." That winter was hard, as Montana winters tended to be, but their house stayed warm and their food supplies held out. Jake had hunted and stocked the larder well, and Olivia had preserved everything possible from her garden. They spent the long, dark evenings reading together, making plans for the spring and talking about names for the baby. As Olivia's belly grew, Jake became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and take on less of the heavy work. She protested at first but eventually accepted his help with good grace, recognizing it came from love rather than any belief she was fragile. Spring arrived with the usual mud and unpredictability, and on a rainy afternoon in late April, Olivia went into labor. Jake rode for the doctor while their neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, who lived about 5 miles away, stayed with Olivia. The baby came quickly once labor started in earnest, a healthy boy with strong lungs and his father's dark hair. Jake returned with the doctor just as Mrs. Hendricks finished cleaning the baby, and the look on Jake's face when he first saw his son was something Olivia would treasure forever. Awe, joy, and overwhelming love chased across his features as he carefully took the tiny bundle in his large, work-roughened hands. "He is perfect," Jake whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Olivia, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel James after both their fathers, and he quickly became the center of their world. Olivia marveled at how much love she was capable of feeling, how her heart had somehow expanded to hold this fierce, protective affection for the tiny person they had created. Jake was a devoted father from the beginning, rising for midnight feedings and changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just watching Samuel sleep. "I never knew," he said one evening, holding his sleeping son against his chest while Olivia prepared supper. "I never knew it was possible to love someone this much." "I know," Olivia agreed, pausing to kiss first Samuel's head and then Jake's cheek. "It is like our hearts had room we did not know existed." Samuel grew quickly, a happy baby who smiled early and often, especially at his father. As he became more aware of his surroundings, he loved watching the horses and cattle, his eyes tracking movement with intense focus. Jake was already planning to teach him to ride as soon as he was old enough. The ranch continued to grow as well. By Samuel's first birthday, they had doubled their cattle herd and added several more horses. Jake's reputation as a horseman and an honest dealer had spread, and people came from as far as 30 miles away to buy animals from him. Money was still tight, but they were making a living, slowly building something sustainable. Olivia's garden had become the envy of the county, producing abundant vegetables and beautiful flowers despite Montana's challenging growing season. She shared her harvest with neighbors and sold surplus at the general store in Butte, adding her own small income to their finances. On a warm evening in June, 2 years after their wedding, they sat together on the porch Jake had built, watching Samuel toddle around the yard under their watchful eyes. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Olivia leaned against her husband's shoulder with a deep sense of contentment. "You ever think about that day?" Jake asked, his arm around her. "The day you carried firewood for Mr. Patterson?" "Sometimes," Olivia admitted. "It is strange to think how one small decision changed everything. If I had been in a hurry, if I had been less kind, our whole life would be different." "I think about it often," Jake said, "about how close I came to never meeting you. If I had finished my business at McGrady's sooner, if I had taken a different route back to the ranch, I would have missed you entirely. But I saw you, Olivia, struggling under that weight but determined to help someone in need, and something in me just knew. This woman, I thought. This is the woman I want to spend my life with." "I am glad you saw me," Olivia said softly. "I am glad you offered to help and that we talked and that you were brave enough to call on me. I am glad for all of it, every moment that led us here." Samuel shrieked with delight at something only he could see, and they both laughed. Jake stood and scooped up his son, lifting him high and making him giggle. Watching them together, Olivia felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for the life they had built. That night, after Samuel was asleep in his cradle and the house was quiet, Jake pulled Olivia into his arms. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day," he said. "I did not think that was possible, but every day you show me new reasons to love you more." "I love you too," Olivia replied, cupping his face in her hands. "You are everything I dreamed of and more, Jake Forrester. You made all my dreams come true." "We made them come true," Jake corrected. "Together. That is how it works, Olivia. We build this life together, side by side, every single day." He was right, she thought as she kissed him. They had built this life together with hard work and determination and love. From that first act of kindness to an old man in need, through courtship and marriage and the challenges of homesteading, they had walked this path together. And they would continue walking it, through whatever the future held. The following years brought more children. A daughter they named Grace Martha when Samuel was 3, and another son, Daniel Thomas, 2 years after that. The house that had started with 4 rooms grew to accommodate their expanding family, just as Jake had planned. They added bedrooms, expanded the kitchen, and built the larger porch where the whole family could gather in the evenings. The ranch prospered as well, becoming one of the more successful small operations in the area. Jake's reputation for honesty and quality livestock continued to grow, and they were able to purchase additional land adjoining their original property. They hired help during busy seasons, young men starting out much as Jake had, and he treated them fairly, remembering his own early struggles. Olivia's garden became legendary in the county, and she began selling not just produce but seeds and starter plants to other homesteaders. She also became known as someone who would help neighbors in need, much as she had helped Mr. Patterson all those years ago. She brought food to families suffering hardship, helped nurse sick children back to health, and never turned away anyone who came to their door asking for assistance. "You are still carrying firewood for people," Jake told her one evening after she had returned from helping a new family settle into their homestead. "Just in different ways. And you still stop to help when you see someone struggling," Olivia pointed out, thinking of the many times Jake had assisted stranded travelers, helped neighbors with difficult tasks, or given second chances to young men who needed them. "We both learned the value of kindness, I think. Neither of us will ever forget what it is to need help." As their children grew, Olivia and Jake made sure to teach them the same values. Samuel, Grace, and Daniel all learned early to help neighbors, to share what they had, and to treat everyone with respect and kindness. The Forrester family became known throughout the area as good people, the kind you wanted as neighbors and friends. Mr. Patterson lived to see Samuel's 5th birthday, and his last visit to the Forrester ranch was filled with satisfaction at how well everything had turned out. "I knew," he told them, his old eyes bright. "That day when you brought me firewood, Miss Kennedy, as you were then, I knew you were something special. And when young Jake here helped you carry it, I knew he saw it too. You have built something good here, something that will last." He passed peacefully in his sleep a few weeks later, and the whole town turned out for his funeral. Jake and Olivia made sure his son knew that his father had played an important role in their happiness, that they would always be grateful for that cold morning when he needed firewood. The years rolled on, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge that characterized frontier life. They lost cattle to harsh winters and predators, celebrated good years with strong calf sales, weathered droughts and floods and all the unpredictable difficulties of ranching in Montana. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake gave Olivia a new ring, a gold band set with garnets all around. "I have been saving for this," he said as he slipped it on her finger beside her original ring. "I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that reflects how precious you are to me." Olivia cried as she looked at the sparkling stones, remembering the simple ring Jake had given her that day in the prairie when he proposed. "I still treasure this one," she said, touching the original ring. "It represents everything we have built together." "Then wear them both," Jake suggested. "The first for where we started, the second for where we are now, and both as a promise of all the years still ahead." By the time Samuel was 15, Grace 13, and Daniel 11, the ranch had become firmly established and prosperous. The original 4-room house had grown to 10 rooms, including a proper parlor where Olivia could entertain visitors, and a library filled with the books she and Jake had collected over the years. The cattle herd numbered over 200 head, and they had some of the finest horses in Montana. Samuel showed signs of inheriting his father's skill with horses and love of ranching. Grace had her mother's gift for growing things and her generous heart, already organizing efforts to help less fortunate families in the area. Daniel was still finding his way, but he had a quick mind and a love of learning that suggested he might be the first Forrester to attend university. Aunt Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, spending weeks at a time at the ranch and doting on her great niece and nephews. She was in her 60s now, but still sharp as a tack, still sewing beautiful things, and still reminding anyone who would listen that she had known Jake was right for Olivia from the very first meeting. "I saw how he looked at you," she would say. "Like you were the answer to every question he had ever asked. A woman knows these things." On a summer evening much like the one when they had sat on their newly built porch 17 years earlier, Olivia and Jake found themselves alone again, the children staying overnight with friends in town, the ranch quiet around them. They sat together watching the sun set over the mountains, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, and reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked. "Taking on a city girl who knew nothing about ranching?" Jake laughed and pulled her closer. "Not for a single second. You learned everything you needed to learn and taught me just as much in return. This ranch succeeds because we built it together, Olivia, because we were partners from the very beginning." "I used to think I had given up so much when we left St. Louis," Olivia mused. "But I did not give up anything. I found everything. I found home and purpose and love and a family. I found the life I was meant to live." "I found all that too," Jake said. "The day I saw you carrying firewood for an old man, doing something kind without expecting anything in return, I found the woman I had been looking for my whole life without knowing it. You carried firewood, Olivia, and you carried my heart with you from that moment forward." "You carried my heart too," Olivia whispered, turning to kiss him. "You still do, Jake, every single day." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had shone on them that first night in their home, that had watched over them through years of joy and struggle and growth. The same stars that would continue watching over their children and grandchildren, over the life they had built through kindness, hard work, and love. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, settling for the night. Closer, the creek burbled its eternal song. And in the house behind them, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of home and happiness that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something enduring and beautiful. "Thank you for stopping that day," Olivia said. "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for loving me." "Thank you for being worth seeing," Jake replied, "for being worth loving, for choosing to build this life with me." "I would choose you again," Olivia said firmly. "Every time, in every circumstance, I would choose you. And I would choose you," Jake echoed. "Forever and always, Olivia. You and this life and this love that started with firewood and kindness and grew into everything." They remained there until the stars filled the sky completely, holding each other close, grateful for the unlikely chain of events that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through 17 years of marriage. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility, but they were not worried. Whatever came, they would face it together, just as they always had. And somewhere in town, an old woman visited Mr. Patterson's grave and smiled, knowing that the firewood her neighbor had needed all those years ago had sparked something beautiful and lasting. That one small act of kindness had rippled outward, creating love and family and a legacy that would continue for generations. That was the power of kindness, Olivia had learned. That was the miracle of seeing someone in need and choosing to help, expecting nothing in return. You never knew what might grow from that single seed of compassion. You never knew whose life you might change, or who might change yours. She carried firewood for an elderly man one autumn afternoon in Butte, Montana. A cowboy saw her kindness and carried her heart forever. And together, they built a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion and the beauty of two people choosing to walk through life side by side. As the years continued to unfold, the Forrester Ranch became a cornerstone of the community. When hard times hit neighboring families, Jake and Olivia were always among the first to offer help, whether it was lending equipment, sharing harvest, or simply being there with a listening ear and practical support. Their children grew into adults who carried forward the same values, creating their own families and continuing the legacy of kindness their parents had begun. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from the next county and took over daily operations of the ranch as Jake gradually stepped back, though he never truly retired. He remained active well into his 60s, still riding out to check on cattle, still building and fixing things with his skilled hands, still sitting on the porch every evening with Olivia to watch the sunset. Grace became a teacher in Butte, educating children and young people while maintaining her mother's tradition of helping those in need. She married a shopkeeper and raised 4 children, filling Olivia and Jake's later years with grandchildren who loved visiting the ranch. Daniel did indeed go to university, studying law and eventually returning to Montana to practice in Helena, the state capital. He fought for fair treatment of small ranchers and homesteaders, using his education to protect people like his parents who had built lives through hard work and determination. Through it all, through the passing decades and changing times, Jake and Olivia's love remained the constant at the center of everything. They had their disagreements, as any couple would over 40-plus years of marriage, but they never lost sight of what had brought them together or the commitment they had made to each other. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from across the county, they renewed their vows in the same little church where they had first married. Jake's hair was silver now, his face deeply lined from years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still that same creek water color, and they still looked at Olivia with the same love and devotion they had held on their wedding day. Olivia's dark blonde hair had gone gray, and her hands showed the marks of decades of hard work, but she remained beautiful in Jake's eyes, more so even than when they had first met. The kindness that had first captured his attention had only deepened over the years, becoming an integral part of who she was and how she moved through the world. 40 years ago, I promised to love and honor you for all my days, Jake said, his voice steady despite the emotion thickening it. I have kept that promise, Olivia, and I will continue keeping it for whatever time we have left. You are still the woman I saw carrying firewood, still the kindest person I know, and I still fall in love with you every single day. And you are still the cowboy who stopped to help a stranger, Olivia replied, tears streaming down her face. Still the man who builds homes and dreams with equal skill, who treats everyone with respect and kindness. I am so grateful I carried firewood that day, Jake. I am so grateful you saw me. I am so grateful for every moment of the life we built together. They kissed while their family and friends applauded, and if it was less passionate than their first kiss, it was no less meaningful. It contained 40 years of shared joy and sorrow, of partnership and parenting, of building something lasting together. It was a kiss that spoke of companionship and commitment, of love that had been tested by time and emerged stronger for it. As evening fell and the celebration continued around them, Jake and Olivia slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch, watching the familiar mountains silhouetted against the sunset. The ranch spread below them, solid and enduring, a physical manifestation of everything they had dreamed of and worked for. "We did well, did not we?" Olivia asked, leaning into Jake's familiar warmth. "We did magnificently," Jake corrected. "We built a life, Olivia. A real, solid, meaningful life full of love and family and purpose. Not everyone gets that. We are blessed beyond measure." "We are," she agreed. "And it all started with Firewood." Jake laughed, the sound rich and warm. "It started with your kind heart seeing someone in need. The Firewood was just the catalyst. You were always going to do something that showed me who you were, and I was always going to fall in love with whoever could be that selflessly kind." "Then I am glad it was me," Olivia said. "So am I," Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. "So am I." They sat together as the stars emerged, as they had so many thousands of times before, and would continue to do for however many years they had left. The love that had begun with a simple act of kindness, that had been nurtured through courtship and strengthened through marriage, that had weathered every challenge and celebrated every joy, remained as strong and true as ever. In the house behind them, their family gathered, multiple generations brought together by the love of two people who had met on a dusty Montana road and recognized in each other something worth holding on to forever. The laughter and conversation drifted out into the evening air, a symphony of love and connection that would continue long after Jake and Olivia were gone, because that was the ultimate legacy of kindness they had learned. It did not just change one life or one moment. It rippled outward through time, creating families and communities and traditions of compassion that could last for generations. One small act, one moment of seeing someone in need and choosing to help, could become the foundation of something eternal. Olivia carried firewood for an elderly man. Jake saw her kindness and carried her heart forever. And together, they built a love story that became a legacy, proving that the smallest acts of compassion can create the greatest transformations, and that true love, founded on mutual respect and shared values, can endure anything time and circumstance might bring. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, they sat together in perfect contentment, grateful for the past, satisfied with the present, and confident in the future they had built for those who would come after them. It was a good life, a meaningful life, and they had lived it together from that first moment to this one, and would continue doing so until the very end. And that was everything they had ever wanted or needed. That was love, true and enduring and built to last forever. That was the miracle of kindness recognized and honored, of two hearts finding each other against all odds and choosing, every single day, to build something beautiful together. The end of their story was really just the beginning of a legacy that would continue through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying forward the lesson that kindness matters, that love endures, and that the smallest actions can change everything. The Forrester name would be remembered in Montana for generations, synonymous with integrity, compassion, and the kind of love that transforms not just individual lives but entire communities. And it all began with firewood, with an old man's need and a young woman's kindness, with a cowboy who recognized something precious when he saw it and had the courage to pursue it. From such small seeds, mighty things grew. From such simple moments, Forever was born.